Thank you so much, Olivia. I hope everyone's having an absolutely amazing Agent Sessions Day. I'm James Montemagno, and I get to close out Agent Sessions Day by sitting down with the one and only Kai to talk about not just sort of the present of what's happening in VS Code, but also the future and how the team has evolved and some pro tips as well. So without further ado, let me bring on Kai. It's such an honor just to get like a few minutes, and we kind of want to end the day and kind of want to ask you a few questions. How's that sound, Kai?
Oh, that sounds good. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, the team has been shipping tons. Like, I just love opening up Insiders every morning, and there's a bunch of goodies nonstop. Just like, the UI is changing, adopting, and it's just honestly just moving so fast, which I actually love. And even Insiders is not just moving, but also stable as well. So I think about it this way. And the first question I want to ask you is like, has agents kind of continued to evolve inside of VS Code, and how developers work with them, and just like the experiences, like, how do you see it evolving over the next few months, and sort of the vision of agents kind of being everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, right, I think we all had this moment where we realized the capability of agents, or the models that are actually being used by those agents, right, really increased. Right, and that really changed the mix of how we spend our time, right? How much agentic coding we actually do compared to, the traditional kind of coding, writing our code ourselves using NES and completions and these kinds of things, right? So that really drastically shifted, right? And I think that kind of move will really persist, right? And will actually spread like wildfire through the developer community, right? Right now, we only have a few people who are really agentic first, right? And I mean, we as an industry, not just we as VS Code, right? But that clearly will change, right? And that means the interactions that you have in VS Code proper, like for example, agent session management and so on, become more primary actions than the actual code editing or code reviewing part, right? So I think that's really number one, right? That is something that, without any doubt, right, really will continue, and it will be like a wave, right? That will be significant, right? So I think that's number one. Number two is people will actually realize that on the one hand, models are extremely strong, but they have personal preferences, and at what point do they actually accept code so that it, let's say, gets almost, let's take the extreme point, gets auto-committed, right? What are all the things that you really feel as someone who runs a project that need to happen until you feel good about this, right? And that goes like, okay, have a solid plan to start with, a solid implementation plan, then a solid implementation, then verification and validation, right? Then code reviews of all different kinds of, performance, security, all of this, right? And then really have agents going through all of this step by step by step, right? And then in the end, you feel really comfortable and say, okay, now either I still go and do some review here, or I feel comfortable that this actually pushes out, right? What level of tests do I need, right? And so on. So I think that is where most of the, how should I say, the fine tuning, or the, figuring out really what your personal workflows should look like, right? What your team's workflow should look like. I think that's a lot of that kind of building your own custom agents, right? And again, we have this whole infrastructure for building custom agents. You've seen that today, right? So I think that's something that really, a lot of people will invest a lot of time. And then based on this, I think we'll learn a lot, right? And by me, you'll learn a lot of what are best practices, what really works, right? I think people will start sharing these kinds of ideas among each other, right? So we'll see some ecosystem where people really start, saying, hey, I have this particular agent that does this kind of thing really, really well. And if you combine it with those other tools that someone else did, right, that actually creates really good benefits. Yeah.
That's really cool. Like, I think, when the plan agent was introduced, it was sort of this first like light bulb moment where you weren't just like prompting the AI, you could actually work with it, iterate with it. And we've seen that really evolve through. And kind of what I'm hearing you say is like, these agents that we think of today as, oh, we have a plan agent, we actually have the coding agent, but you're actually saying like, really in the workflow of how do we turn these agents into the full sort of life cycle, right? So not just planning, implementation, but reviewing, but testing, and having that loop. Like, do you really see like that how we evolve as engineers inside of VS Code writing code? Is like we'll be toggling, or do you think there'll be orchestration between all of them?
I think there will be orchestration, right? And the interesting thing is when I say custom agents, right, I'm not necessarily saying that there needs to be explicit custom agent as an entity, right? Because models get better. The next model generation will do some of this by itself and so on. But what I really mean is, as I mentioned before, is the workflow I think a piece of code needs to go through from an idea to be implemented, to be verified and reviewed, and performance reviewed, security reviewed, verified that it really did what it's supposed to do compared to, let's say, the plan or the figmas that were part of the plan and so on, right? So I think that's really how that needs to come, right? And the easiest way to think through this one is actually through what I would say actors, right? Let's say I gave my code review agent, I give the name James, right? And I was like, oh, James needs to review the code, and I'm good, right? It's an easy way for me as a human to think through this one, right? It's not so very technical, it's very approachable, right? And I think we'll see a lot of this, right? So we humanize these kinds of interactions flows, right? We're not just thinking this like, oh, this is a more advanced kind of CI flow or something, right? I think we will think in actors, and that makes it very approachable to us as humans. Makes it very easy to give feedback and improve certain kinds of things, right? And again, right, you can build this today. The infrastructure is there. You can build this today, and I think you will see more of this.
That's very cool. Yeah, we've seen obviously all of the agents, but also hooks coming out and sort of this workflow, these handoffs as well. And I like that as well. Recently, Pierce had posted something about how he's using a kind of custom review agent, but having multiple, actually one for each different model. Here's a Gemini, here's a Codex, here's a Claude. And I set this up, and I recently just really found that having models, just like I would have you review my code, everyone's going to review it a little bit different. Everyone's going to critique in a little bit different. And those personalities are very unique. So I'd encourage everyone to kind of put that kind of actor hat on and say, hey, listen, let's run with these different models and kind of put on these hats of let's go see what happens. Not that you're putting them against each other, but kind of in a way. But it's just like if you were getting multiple code reviews from all of your best friends, you have all of these, agents and models ready to kind of help you code review and do so much more, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, right? They do have different qualities, right? And we see this. And so there is real benefit out of this, right? When you actually, let's say, Opus writes some code and you let Codex review the code and so on, right? Like Codex, for example, right? I just had this conversation right before I came to you, is very good at trying to figure out if there's, if the code has good performance or not, and if how performance can be improved, right? It doesn't speculate. It really goes in and saying, no, we've got to do this the right way. Let's create the benchmark here, and then before and after, right? And figure out what we can do. And it's really good at this. Why wouldn't you use that particular property of a model in order to improve your code, right? And I think the beauty here is that we, with GitHub as our service provider, right, really have this multi-model story, right? We can use it. It's there for everyone, right? And so we can really use the best possible model for each job, and we can make sure that they together actually create a good job, right? So as I said, people will experiment with this, right? We'll see more in the community, but I think we will also then change, right, what comes out of the box and how that behaves.
That's awesome. I'm excited to see it continue to evolve, and the team has absolutely just been like destroying it and crushing it. I honestly love every single morning, like I said, waking up. Let's talk about VS Code itself, right? Like really the competitive AI landscape is not just models, it's editors, it's the whole world of coding and the integrations as well. How do you and the team really ensure that, VS Code really stays super committed to its kind of core principles of being open and extensible in this sort of AI first landscape?
Yeah, I mean, well, you just said it, right? It's one of our core values. So, and how do we make sure that we are not violating our own values while by checking on them from time to time, right? I think that they're a core part of our development process, right? And since, for example, right, we open source all of our code, in the Copilot extension, right, and so on. I think that really was obvious that this is where we're going, right? So agent loops can be contributed, right? We have bring your own key providers and so on. So I think there's a good fair playing field here, right? And as I just mentioned with the custom agents, for example, right, I also think there's a lot of wisdom in the community, right? So that we want to see really flourishing. I think that's number one, right? Um, and that together with, as I said, the multi-model story that we have, right? I think that puts us in a very interesting spot, right? We have access to top end the line models, right? We verify that they all work, really well, that we can bring them to users, right? And that together with the community and also us, tracking what's happening across the board, right? And going with the flow, that's very important, right? And when I say going with the flow, it has a lot also to do with, we always have been dog fooders, right? You know that, right? So we always used VS Code to develop VS Code. And now we're using agents in order to develop VS Code and improve the agentic experience and so on. That means we are building our own custom agents. And there we realize, oh, something is missing and we push things forward, right? And so that experience from self-hosting, dog fooding, the experience from what happens around us in the industry, what we hear from our community customers, what we see in issues, right? That really makes us moving and make sure that people have a really good experience.
That's awesome. I also feel like there's this, the extension ecosystem and opening up those extensions to really bring in more. We've seen like, not just, bring your own model, being able to bring your own prompts in, be able to extend VS Code itself, right? I think is like really kind of magical, that sort of like the things that are built into the box, you as a developer, like you can have the Kai extension that does things that Kai wants, right? I've told this to a lot of teams that have come to me, but I really wanted to do this, or my team operates this way. And I said, well, build an extension for it. Like you can almost do kind of anything. How does a team think about that extensibility part? Like opening up like the core of VS Code, right? To enable anyone to build an extension or hooks into VS Code. Like how has that thought process kind of changed kind of over this last year or two?
I think what changed is what does customization look like, right? And before it was always an extension, right? And then, right, the early extensibility was prompt files, for example, right? But also MCP servers, for example, right? And now there's more. There's custom agents, as we talked about. There are hooks, right, that come into it. So I think it's more around the pretty much a bundling of how you instruct a model, what MCP servers you want to need, right? Maybe you need an extension in order to implement a particular kind of tool that you want your agent to use, right? So I think that's the most common case where people still build extensions as we know them, right? Yeah, right. And this bundled up kind of creates a new experience for you, right? And allows you to implement the workflow that your team really needs, right? But over time, I would actually say that building in a pure extension, as you know it, right, is a little bit less of a need as compared to the old days, right? It's way more building your workflows with custom agents, MCP servers, and so on, right? And now that MCP servers also can create UI within the chat, right? There's an additional level of interactive experiences that you can build, right? So yeah, but if you really want to take over, right, you still can create the custom editor, custom view, all of this, right? And there are partners who actually do that. So
There's a lot more building blocks that you can extend out, basically.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit here, just how like the team has evolved over the last few months, the last year, the processes. You talked a little bit about how the team is developing agents. Can you just kind of talk a little bit more about how the VS Code team at its core is actually, like you said, adopting these processes and how that sort of impacted the team's workflow?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's actually a lot that happened here. But let's give me a very simple example, right? So you start out and you use an agentic flow in order to create code, right? So at the very moment you do this, right? So there's and it's quite standard now that this is automatically reviewed by a different model, right? And then only when all of the review comments are actually addressed by this other model made, right? Then you even look as a human, right? And then there are some other folks who actually have built their own complete custom workflows, as I said, right, with a whole bunch of different agents and how they interact and so on for particular tasks, right? We're not just building VS Code, we have an engineering system behind the scenes, right? This allows us to do what we do, right? And we, for example, replaced one component of this engineering system. And the person who did that built a whole kind of, army of little agents that have all different rules and responsibilities, and this whole thing got rebuilt, and I think that is something that, as I said, right, we learn what we do here, we bring this back into the product, right, with different ways of extensibility, for example, right, and what is it that really needs to be there to allow people to do the same thing. That's one. The other one is speed, right? And it is quite mind-boggling when you think through this one, right? It was always like there was no shortage of good ideas. It was all about execution, right? And if you didn't execute well, none of your ideas mattered, right? And that is to some degree changing, right? Because implementation can be done or can be achieved relatively quickly, right? And if you just think about this logically looking forward a bit, right? Another 2, 3, 4 months, right? New model drops and so on. Then the time of execution actually shrinks. So then you have a lot of time to have good ideas, but then too many good ideas, right? This is like also doesn't work, right? So now it shifts very radically to what is it actually that you built? And how do you bring this to users? And then you have multiple variations of this. So how do you let people play with those different variations and then learn from them and then say, no, this idea here is actually the best. Let's go forward with this one, right? And then how do we communicate to the outside what we are actually doing, right? Because we used to publish it. We still do this, our iteration plans, right? But if most of the time is actually spent in discussing what you want to do compared to actually implementing this, then plans are, a plan that covers an iteration is extremely hard, because, all of the ideas you might have implemented in a few days, right? Clearly, there's always some long running and so on, right? But if you just think about UI changes and so on, right, then the actual implementation time shrinks very much so. And that means you have to adapt as a team, how you think about things, how you operate, right? And I think that really is all happening, right? And I think it's happening not just in our team again, right? I think that's really universally happening right now.
Yeah, and I see, especially because I'm so active watching every single team here at Microsoft really adopt and ramp up, and new workflows all spurring up all the time, and the building blocks continue to evolve. You see these continuous light bulb moments happening faster and faster and faster. So I want to end it with one kind of fun question for you, Kai, which is like, someone today is open up VS Code. What's kind of Kai's pro tip, basically, like to get the most out of it? The thing that you do kind of maybe every day, or something that maybe is your favorite kind of unknown hidden feature, or all of those, whatever you want to go into.
Oh, I mean, for me personally, right, as I said, I'm part of that whole transition into more and more agentic flows, right? And what I realized is that I think I already wove it in some of my answers earlier, right? I have an easier time thinking in personalities and actors, right? And so for me, it's much easier to think through this. What is trusted code for me, right? And for some of my private, personal projects that I'm running, I develop these kinds of workflows in order to see how things are going. And it's really easy. And it's not hard. And it feels like a lot of work needs to go into this, right? But it's not really. You can actually evolve these things incrementally while you're working, right? You can use actually the agentic capabilities in order to evolve the custom agents, right? You point them at your agent files and ask for modifications and additions and these kinds of things, right? And that is just, how should I say, this is really important, right? Because in the beginning, it was all about, the code is the one thing that is the most important that you have, right? And we removed a lot of other artifacts. And now it's actually somewhat not the other way around, but artifacts now is, what is your project all about? What are the customizations, namely the workflow, for example, or the hooks that you want to have run and so on. And you might not have a single line of code at this moment yet, right? And then you go and actually, start developing your code. I think that's one of those, right? Really having this in mind, right? That customization is the thing that actually brings you to success.
That's awesome.
And the last one is, we're still humans, right? I have to say, I don't get a kick out of writing a spec for an hour or something, right? That's not what makes me happy. I like to work incrementally, right? My mind is a little bit messy when it comes to this. One idea builds on top of the other and so on. And what I realize is I cannot assume that the code that comes out of this kind of incremental process is actually worthwhile. So what I'm doing is I incremental something, I develop something incrementally, then I create pretty much a spec out of this using agent and saying, give me this Markdown spec, and then I just do a little bit of edits there, and then I give it again to a model and say, now implement this whole thing, right? So the first thing is a prototype, and the second thing is the thing that I actually want, right? And I think, try this up. Maybe you also get a good result out of this.
I like that a lot. And yeah, stop doing the things that don't make you happy. Spend more time on the things that do make you happy. I think that's a perfect place to end. Kai, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for running Agent Session Day for us.
Yes, and thanks for the entire team, the amazing sessions, everyone that's been watching at home. And as always, happy coding.
Happy coding.